Good afternoon and welcome everyone. Welcome to our esteemed panel of dermatology experts, our spectacular live audience, as well as the viewers at home that are joining in. I welcome you to our panel on the future of dermatology in the age of artificial intelligence. I am your host and moderator, Dr. Ekama Carlson. I'm a board-certified dermatologist and dermatologic surgeon. I practice in San Francisco, where I'm the founder and medical director of the California Center for Dermatologic Surgery. I will begin with our introductions to our panelists. So first, we have Dr. John Koo. Dr. Koo comes to us from UCSF, where he's a professor of dermatology and the co-director of the UCSF Psoriasis Treatment Center. Dr. Koo has authored over 300 peer-reviewed articles and books. He's won a number of recognitions, including a Lifetime Achievement Award by the National Psoriasis Foundation. Welcome, Dr. Koo.
Thank you.
Next, we have Dr. April Armstrong. Dr. Armstrong is a professor and chief of dermatology at the University of California, Los Angeles. She's a renowned expert in inflammatory skin diseases, including atopic dermatitis and psoriasis. She is also a prolific contributor to our field. She's conducted over 150 clinical trials and has published more than 400 peer-reviewed articles in dermatology. Dr. Armstrong is also a recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award by the National Psoriasis Foundation. Welcome, Dr. Armstrong.
Thank you for having me.
And last but not least, we have Dr. Faranak Kamangar. Dr. Kamangar is a board-certified dermatologist based in Palo Alto, California, where she's the chair of dermatology at the Palo Alto Medical Foundation. In addition to her regular work at Sutter Health in the Bay Area, she is also a leader of PSO telehealth, focusing on psoriasis. Dr. Kamangar and her work in dermatology and telehealth has been cited in many media outlets, including Pop Sugar, Brit & Co., and Medical News Today. She's actually involved in the production of a new AI product that has the potential to affect our practice of dermatology. Welcome, Dr. Kamangar.
Thank you.
And on that note, this is probably a good time to tell us a little bit more about this exciting new project.
So we are at the SF Derm Society Eczema Symposium and 100-year celebration, which is a very momentous occasion for the society. It's one of the oldest societies in the US. And so this is a good time to kind of reflect on the old and the new and the history of dermatology and the future. And I personally am a little biased, but think that AI is going to be a huge part of it. So at this conference, we incorporate a lot of the AI information, and then we're launching Derm GPT, which is a product of mine, and only of mine. Just a disclaimer, Dr. Koo and Dr. Armstrong are here to tell us more about where their thoughts on where his dermatology has been and where it's going as well. So really happy to talk about it. Thank you.
That is wonderful. Thank you for that introduction. Okay, and as Dr. Kamangar mentioned, SF Derm is celebrating 100 years of existence as a dermatologic society in the Bay Area, one of the oldest, the second oldest medical society in the US. We have about 120 dermatologists here with us and also 35 dermatology residents in training tuning in. Now, with all of this history, 100 years of history, we've undoubtedly seen changes in the way that we practice dermatology. Dr. Koo, in your experience and your many years of practice, can you talk about some of these changes that you've seen and how have they affected your practice?
Oh, well, first of all, I should mention that I'm an old fart. I've been in dermatology almost 40 years.
Wow.
And that is after being in psychiatry for a while. So I hate to admit, but in 1 year and 3 months, I'm going to be 70.
Well, you're a young 70.
Oh, thank you. So yes, I have seen a whole lot of changes, and much of it is really good. Both Dr. Armstrong and I are very much into inflammatory skin conditions, psoriasis, atopic dermatitis, and others. And as I think everyone knows, the treatment for those conditions have completely changed. Because when we started with psoriasis, for example, or when I started, I shouldn't say we, because I'm the old father, she's not. We used something called Ekama therapy, which is all-day, everyday black tar treatment. We use mostly topical therapy, phototherapy, and things like methotrexate. Most dermatologists just stayed away from it. So dermatology was very much lotions and potions. And it's been like that Even if you go back another 50 years, it's only in the last, maybe 2-3 decades that internal medication become not only acceptable and widely used, but really change the way that the patient can get better, faster, and safer. So that's the good news. but I have also seen the bad news, which is that when we went from things like methotrexate, which is dirt cheap, and topical medication, which were back then not expensive at all, we really didn't have much problem getting approval, for insurance company to pay for it. Now, these newer medications like biologic, now JAK inhibitors, they are so much more effective compared to like methotrexate, compared to like topical. And even safety. If I think of methotrexate with 14 black box warnings, and 6 of them have to do with possible death, like fulminant hepatitis and so forth, we have new medication that really have no black box warning and probably work 2 or 3 times as good. But the amount of paperwork we have to do to get these to the patients is like nothing we imagined decades ago. And I think that's the other side of it, which unfortunately is not so pleasant for the providers to work on getting the patients. My mentor, Dr. Mark Level, of New York, he used to joke that we used to have prescription pad. Now we only have suggestion pad because we only suggest. Whether the patient actually get the medicine or not is up to the insurance company. So anyway, I think that's the big change.
Yeah. Dr. Armstrong, do you care to comment?
Yeah,
please?
if I may add, well, before Dr. Koo revealed his age, I thought he started dermatology at 5 years old. So I think a lot has changed, and I completely agree with Dr. Koo regarding the trends in terms of therapy for psoriasis. I think adding to that, there are 2 trends that I see that have evolved over time in dermatology. One is how our new graduates, when they come out, they are oftentimes seeking for positions that are associated with larger institutions. So whereas I would say in the former years, people after they graduate tend to really think about going to private practice. I think these days, more new graduates are looking for more sort of institutional positions. And I think the second trend is how we consume information and how we learn information. And we've all been there where, when I went to medical school, you had to be at the lectures in person to consume information in person. And now I'm sure, when we go give lectures, there are like 2 students in the audience, but it doesn't mean that they're not digesting the information. They're digesting it on their own time and probably oftentimes a little bit better on demand. So I think how we learn information and how we have gone from, flipping through the books, Fitzpatrick and Andrews, when we were in residency to now, where I think residents and medical students are oftentimes going to digital means of acquiring that information, I think is another huge change.
If I may just add on to
Please.
what Dr. Armstrong mentioned about once upon a time, most people went into private practice. Now it's becoming like rarity. Most people join some kind of a group. And I think there's many reasons for that, including the fact that operating your business, and private practice is a business, I think it's becoming a lot more onerous, from government regulation, insurance requirement, all kinds of point of view. So it just make it more feasible for recent graduate to just join a group. But I'm sure people have heard of like private equity group, some other group. Now, I'm not casting any kind of judgment whether it's profit driven or not. But I have heard that there's tendency to have to see more patients with less time.
Of course.
And I think that is also a challenge for a lot of the dermatologists today. on top of having to do all this pre-authorization and insurance paperwork, fight with the insurance company, and have to see more patients in less time, I think that makes it more difficult.
Right. Right, and I totally agree. I think that just what I'm hearing is that there have been a lot of good changes over the past many years, but there are also some challenges. And some of those challenges have to do with, physicians having to do a lot of unnecessary work, like prior authorizations, burdens with starting practices, fresh out of residency, where the average residents graduate with over $150,000 in debt. And so those are all some of the problems that physicians are facing today. The next question I have, and just sort of a segue into how artificial intelligence, with respect to medicine, how you think it's been received by physicians, and then also how it's changed or practiced in any ways, and just a little bit about that. So when AI was first introduced through Chat GPT earlier this year, I think the reception has vacillated between a lot of fear and uncertainty. For example, are dermatologists going to become obsolete? Is ChatGPT going to take our jobs? There were particularly articles that had to do with reviews or case reports by AI-generated content being better and more readable compared to articles written by human authors. So things like that. AI doing better on tests like USMLE exams, et cetera, than humans. And so those are some of the concerns that a lot of physicians have with regards to artificial intelligence. On the other hand, some of that response has been positive. Just speaking to what you mentioned, Dr. Koo, some of this unnecessary work that physicians have to do. Is there a way that we could harness this technology to improve our workflows, improve our efficiency, automate things like prior authorizations? And so these are just some of the things that people that are excited about artificial intelligence are excited about. That's what they feel like we could benefit from. So the next question is, and this is for all the panelists here, what do you think the perception of AI in our field has been? In your experience, how do you think that we have welcomed AI or just perceived it? Do you perceive it as a threat or as something that could benefit both our lives and our patients' lives as well as our practice?
I'm actually kind of technologically challenged, kind of an old fart, and pretty awful with computer, So I really cannot talk for the dermatology in general. On the other hand, from what I understand, I think the fear that somehow computer is going to replace us is, from what I know, which is very little, unfounded. Because first of all, I don't think that the visual capability of the machine is there yet. And second is there's no way machine can actually touch, the skin to see if it's thick or not so thick, if it's scaly or not so scaly. So the diagnosis, I think it's going to be a long time before the machine can come close to human. But as I was mentioning, some of the real pain in the butt kind of situation today is more like pre-authorization. And that, I think AI can excel. Because when you apply for pre-authorization, you have to individualize it. It's not like, it's not like giving a patient a pamphlet about a treatment. And I think AI is going to be fantastic and efficient and get providers to not have to worry about that kind of work, and that would be fantastic.
Giving physicians more flexibility to do the things that they're trained to do and they enjoy doing.
Right.
Yeah. What about you, Dr. Armstrong? Any comments on that?
Yeah, lots of comments, and I'm trying to think about how to categorize my comments. So first of all, I think there's a lot of potential for good for artificial or augmented intelligence. There's also potential for limitations or pitfalls. Ultimately, I think AI really depends on the sources of information that it's built on. So So it's very important for that information to be accurate, current, and as well as specific. So the usefulness of AI algorithms is really how specific it is to the question that you're asking. A few things. We mentioned about testing before, where yes, there are articles that show that some AI algorithm can test better than, let's say, human medical students or so forth, but there are also ones that shows the opposite. And why that's the case is oftentimes I think about the sources of information that the AI algorithms are fed, right? So if they're fed from a heterogeneous source where there can be outdated information or information that's not true, so then the results will be more poor. Completely agree with Dr. Koo about how AI can help us with administration, right? Administrative work. But then the question there is, are there components of our health system that we can, steps that we can eliminate even, right, in the first place, So that's another one. But very importantly, actually, patient care, in the sense that, we're all very much in the trenches where we receive patient messages and so forth. And I think we're all aware of the study where they showed that the AI was actually received better than actual physicians putting in responses, right, by both patients and also blinded physician raters. So in those cases, I think AI is actually very good in terms of conveying emotional intelligence. When you look at how AI expresses things, and I use ChatGPT all the time for different, just different queries. And it's really interesting, it phrases things in a way that really expresses some emotional intelligence that you wouldn't think something like AI would have. So I think all this is very positive. I think in derm, there's definitely a gap because as a frequent user of more generalized AI, I would say, oftentimes it doesn't even recognize the derm terms, right? So it's getting it wrong if you're dictating it. And so the output, could be much more improved.
If I may just expand on what Dr. Armstrong mentioned about patient care, apart from the AI helping us with the prior authorization and that type of paperwork, the other area that I think AI might be extremely useful is patient education. Because when we went from simple lotions and potions to something a lot more complicated, like JAK inhibitor, biologics, patient education becomes even more critical. We have to tell patients better than what we used to. Put it on twice a day. Don't put it on face, armpit, and groin because it's a strong steroid. That's about all we had to do before. Right. But now we have to explain about the dosage, the delivery. For example, biologic agents. I really like to tell patients, and I try to tell patients about phenomena of biologic fatigue, secondary failure. That means patients, they do extremely well initially with an injectable biologic agent. But over time, it can lose efficacy. And that phenomena can be worsened if the patients think that they can quit. When they think they can slack off on their treatment, not knowing that their own body can make anti-biologic antibodies because biologic agents are protein. Mm-hmm. But when we only have like 10 minutes per patient, right, we just don't have the time. But that kind of patient education need to be, or it's best served if it's individualized, not just handing out a pamphlet.
Right. How do you think, just to follow up on that, how do you envision something like Chat GPT or Derm GPT, which we'll talk about, helping a patient with that education process? Like, do you, in form of a video, like how can you individualize it for that patient? When you envision AI helping with that particular need?
I actually have zero experience with Chat GPT, but from what I have heard, for example, writing letter of recommendation, which has to be individualized. If you tell the computer, some key factors, then computer will generate something that looks like somebody wrote it, somebody who knew this applicant for years. Right. And that's the kind of thing we need when we try to individualize patient education depending on their risk factor, depending on their weight, and whether they're a smoker or non-smoker. So if we can just put some key elements and let the AI do the education, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. Do you have any thoughts about that, Dr. Kamangar?
I can definitely chime in on the AI piece. So I couldn't have said it better myself. Dr. Koo and Dr. Armstrong mentioned, we're in the best time of dermatology because we have all these targeted therapies and we have ways to help patients without telling them, well, in 4 years, you might have to biopsy your liver or these things that we had to do before. But at the same time, we have all these barriers in getting these medications, all these difficulties in practice, which is probably why a lot of new graduates also go into these groups because like in our group, we're a big group. We have an entire group dedicated to doing prior authorizations, something that probably a private practice doctor just couldn't necessarily afford, necessarily having like a biologic coordinator, having a prior auth coordinator. So I think the place that will fix a lot of these things, it'll be technology in the future. So I really see that. And AI, of course, is the best technology we have. So I think there's definitely a space for that. The pitfalls mentioned are that the data has to be good. The data has to be the right place where you're looking because you can put in anything you want and get some answer out, but if you don't trust it, if it's not accurate, then it's not very helpful to you. Derm GPT, as I mentioned, so I'll talk a little bit about it. It's a
Please, that was actually going to be my next question.
If you guys are okay with it, I'll just to talk about AI. As you asked the AI question. So it is the first generative AI product for dermatology that I've created, and it's a chatbot for dermatology, and it's specific because it has only dermatology information in it. It's peer reviewed. It's the information that we as a dermatologist would source. It's what you would go to, except it's right at your fingertips. Instead of having to sift through a textbook, instead of having to go to PubMed and look up articles, these things that we know we want are there. And it's very carefully curated because even if you go to PubMed and you look for something, there might be a lot of articles that aren't necessarily what you want. So it's basically the brain of what dermatologists trying to guess for your peer. If they're trying to look up something, you could probably guess what they're trying to look up. So it's a source information, also decreases hallucinations and making up things that might not be true. So it's factual. But the problems it's trying to solve, which I think will be a huge help, are basically replacing that biologic coordinator, prior auth. So it can automate a lot of things that would have to have been done by a workforce that costs overhead. And I think hopefully will remove some barriers in new doctors being able to start private practices if they want and have these kinds of practices because they can easily answer my health online messages, look up, like for example, if a lot of prior auths get denied even for simple things, like you might miss a step that you're supposed to put in the note. But if it's a new medication, and in academics, I think it's easy to keep up with these things. As private practice, you might not keep up with all the new medications because there's so many coming out. You might not be able to keep up with the indications for what you need to put in a prior auth note. So like, for example, if you have a prurigo nodularis patient and a medication has a new indication, you can easily look up what should I put in my note, and it would tell you things like put, the BSA and what have they failed in the last 180 days, put how many prurigo nodules they have, like all these kind of specific things, because ultimately you don't want your prior auth to get denied for a silly thing, because a prior auth denial, we all know, is like no man's land. You don't want to go there. Exactly. It's a lot of faxes. It's a lot of MA calls. So, and my personal belief, and I don't know if this will pan out, but I actually believe we can sort of alleviate the prior auth situation by being successful at prior auths. Because I think if we are getting prior auths through very quickly, very efficiently, insurance companies will realize they're losing money on entire units running these things, and they'll ease up. So in prior auth goes. So I think it's a win-win to do these things, and ultimately for your patients, they get medication sooner. So my whole practice, for example, like I basically can't get through clinic without Derm GPT now, just because it's so easy for me. I could also Google it. I could look up other things, but it's an extra few seconds. And in clinic, I am a kind of practice where I do see a lot of patients. So if a message comes in, I put it in there, and it does sound way better than what I would write. 100%. It sounds better. I read it, I proof it. My MAs might look things up and have a draft, and if it looks right, we'll send it to the return patients, and it answers the right question. Prior auth help, board studying, it can generate questions. So a lot of different ways. But basically, I think like Dr. Armstrong said, it has to be a good data source, because otherwise you're going to get biased information or incorrect information.
Right.
For patient education, I think it's really important too. Like, for example, we have all of the patient education handouts from the different companies and the different groups that help patients with these things. And then those update all the time. So the links are live. So they'll update those. So they'll have the latest patient handout or the latest, patient coupon code or things like that. But I think that is a niche that I think we haven't had to do as much of it in the past, but I think going in the future, our tasks are increasing every day. So I think we need automated help, because otherwise it's really difficult to hire human beings to help with all of that. Also, it's just generally, even if you can afford it out of a private practice situation, it's hard to keep consistent staff, and then just kind of training everybody constantly on these things is hard. So having a source of information in clinic, I think, is just something that we have to do. The other piece, and I'll pass on the mic, but the other piece I'll say is, I think traditionally what's kind of led to a lot of burnout for physicians is a lot of technology has happened to us, but without us involved. I did engineering before medical school, so I have done a lot of health tech consulting and kind of seeing how these products develop. They're not always with the physician in mind, because the people developing them are engineers and other fields, and they mean well, and they're they want to create a good product, but I think you can't create a good product until you're in there and seeing the problems every day. So I would urge that more doctors actually become involved. If there is a technology being built for healthcare, it should be physician first, just like anything. And I think that will hopefully lessen burnout, because a lot of our burnout is just around trying to figure out products that are sort of thrown at us and aren't an exact fit. So
I think, one thing I wanted to just sort of react to, and that I think that's such great information, Dr. Kamangar, that you just shared, is sort of systems interoperability, right? So we have EMR systems, and what you said, given such a great example of how, you cannot not use Derm GPT during your practice. And I think, a product such like that, if that can be integrated, for example, so we don't have to open up a separate browser, for example, to get the answers, that would be something that could be very helpful and even more time saving. Yeah.
I think one thing that Dr. Kamangar mentioned is staff turnover. Because every practice have that problem where you spend a long time training somebody, finally got it right, and then that person said, "Oh, I'm applying to nursing school, I'm applying to medical school, I'm applying to PA school," and they disappear. And then you have to start the whole thing from scratch. Now, I can imagine that if it's artificial intelligence, not going to run away like that. and I think that would be fantastic. Yeah. Now, overall cost perspective, I can imagine that AI is going to be more cost effective than a human being, who can only work like certain hours in a day. AI might be able to work 24/7. AI is not, once again, not going to abandon you and disappear to some place. But two questions that I think I'm sure Dr. Kamangar is going to look into it very seriously. One, is the technology there yet? And from what little I know, I think for things like pre-authorization, I'm pretty confident technology is there. The second is, what is the actual cost relative to what we're doing right now with human beings. Now, Dr. Armstrong and I are highly supportive, but we're not part of the development of this product. So only Dr. Kamangar can answer that, but I'm hoping that it's going to be affordable and make it cost effective.
Yeah,
Can you answer
and I'll just
that, Dr.
comment
Kamangar?
on that.
Yeah,
I think
please.
that's a really good point. So the AI cannot run away, but also it'll stay there and get smarter and smarter because it's generative AI. So the more we feed into it and the more peer-reviewed information that we put into it, it'll just get even better and better. And the more trials it has, it gets better. So since ChatGPT has come out, more and more iterations of it have even come out. So the technology is really there now, which is really what's revolutionized everything in the last year. If even before ChatGPT ChatGPT, let's say a year ago or 2 years ago, if you were to run a machine learning language model like this, you would take months to do a trial. And if you did, it would cost like $200,000 or something like that. I'm just making up numbers, but it was a very onerous task to teach something to the computer, and you could teach one at a time. So as you can imagine, like a child or a toddler learning language, if you try to teach them every single concept, it would take forever, but the human brain can kind of make inferences like, well, I've seen that before and I've seen this, and maybe it's this, and that's how language development happens. And generative AI now can kind of mimic that. So it's so much more cost effective. And I think I agree. I think the technology is there. The good thing with Derm GPT is actually it's free to everybody here this weekend. So really, that's one of the things that I also believe in. I think there's so much technology that is handed to us as dermatologists containing dermatologic information, but then we're sort of being charged for it, which is something I personally think it shouldn't really be. I think like scientific articles and all of this should just, the personal belief should just be more free and available. If you're treating a patient and this information will change how you would treat them, or if you're learning, you're trying to take the boards, there shouldn't be educational barriers. Like our students, I know a lot of times they'll complain to us about the board study questions now all have fees to them. And those are just all added costs, and costs are going up and up. Everyone has higher medical school and residence and debt and all of that. So I think the affordability piece is very important.
That's fantastic. And just a follow-up question to that, Dr. Armstrong mentioned some of the limitations of AI with respect to dermatology. So either information that's not very relevant to the question being asked, particularly when it comes to imaging-based AI. So the question I have for you, Dr. Kamangar, is how does Derm GPT help solve that issue of recognizing subtle differences in, for example, inflammatory skin disorders across different skin types, lighter skin versus darker skin? Like, is that technology there, and how can, if it's not, how can we contribute to that?
That's actually a really, really good question, because there's sort of the two different models of image-based AI and language processing, which is Derm GPT is actually just language-based processing without trying to do the visual base. There's a lot of work being done around visual diagnosis of things and visual AI. This really, for me, it was meant to be a tool to help the dermatologist. Dermatologist is there, seeing the patient, touch the patient, done biopsies, has the diagnosis, and just needs to get through the day, get the patient education, do the prior authorizations, write notes, My Health Online messages, on and on and on, all the things you have to do, residence, training, learning. It's really meant to be sort of like you're just in your pocket, almost like a senior resident, I like to think of it, who can just look things up for you, and then while you kind of do what you're doing. But it doesn't have any visual component. I don't know if there are different companies doing it. I don't know if the technology is really there with the visual. I've seen different versions of the visual, but that I think I'm actually pretty confident I don't think can ever replace us. I think we're a little bit better than the AI that can tell visual difference.
I think that's a really important distinction, because what I'm hearing is that it adds to, it's another tool in our armamentarium to improve our practice, but without that fear of AI replacing us or giving wrong information to a patient, which, with AI, one of the advantages is that it's very accessible to patients, but we don't want a situation where patients are getting wrong information that negatively affects their life. So that's a great distinction. So next question, this is actually our last question to the panelists. AI is only one of the latest trends affecting our practice in the field of dermatology and medicine in general. Can you speak about any other trends that you think have the potential? So we have the 100 years of practice behind us as a group. Looking onto the future, what other trends do you think has the potential to either disrupt or positively impact our practice as dermatologists?
Well, I'm not going beyond AI, but since we're talking about the future, which could be like science fiction. Nowadays, we have companies Castle Pharmaceuticals and others that actually take superficial scales, not even a biopsy, and able to figure out what genes are turned on and what genes are turned off, either for a particular patient with particular disease. So we were talking about how AI's visual capacity probably not as good as human being in terms of how we see and how we interpret in our brain. But I can imagine a situation way into the future. I'm not trying to make anybody nervous who's practicing today. Way into the future, where AI might be able to see things that we cannot see. What is under the skin? What if AI, has capability to look under the skin, or maybe take minimal non-invasive sample, and AI can see what genes are turned on and off for this particular patient. And what if that contribute to making diagnosis? So we're not so reliant upon our senses, but we go beyond what is apparent to our eyes. Very much like long time ago, as I understand, medicine used to emphasize physical examination. If you touch the stomach, is the thing round? Is it a little bit not round?
Yeah.
Well, nowadays we don't emphasize that because you can do MRI and you can see if it's round or not round.
Right.
So we might get to the situation way into the future, where AI might have the capacity to see things that we cannot see.
Next question for you, Dr. Armstrong. Same question. Trends in the future.
That's very interesting. I think of AI actually not as a trend, but it's definitely something here to stay and only evolving. I think certainly our higher education or even, we have kids, at young ages, even seeing them and what their education will be like in the future will be very, very different. I think we've really gone far away from didactic, one-directional type of teaching to now very kind of case specific, and then the ability to collate the different sources of information. And I think that that AI will help them learn differently as well. So I think they will probably be a lot more comfortable kind of growing up with AI, and also our students as well, kind of having AI sort of as a very important accessory piece, because why memorize something if you know how to access it, right? We just have to make universal Wi-Fi free.
And I'll just add
which
on.
could be the next trend.
Yeah, right. And I'll just add briefly to, so I don't need to move on to the questions, but I'm just going to emulate both of those answers. I agree. I think our new residents and medical students are different. And I think because technology's made them different, my little toddlers have iPhones. So I think they're going to be a different breed. They're going to learn a lot differently than the ways we did. And they're probably going to be able to cope with these changes and adapt a lot more quickly than we can. And then I also agree with Dr. Koo with personalized medicine. I think that's going to be a huge trend. But yeah, I'll let you get to that.
That was it. I think it's time for questions now. Yeah?
Yes, we have some in the Zoom room.
Okay.
The first one is, what are the costs for the Derm of implementing Derm GPT?
Yeah, so actually currently we are running the beta version of Derm GPT. It's launched actually this weekend, so it's launched today. Any dermatologist or dermatology provider can join now for free. And once it goes out of the beta test, that crowd actually will be legacied in. So feel free to join now if you're interested in it.
Sounds great. Sounds like we should all join now.
Yeah, but if you want to.
I just joined.
Oh, perfect.
Is there another question? Yeah.
Yes, a follow-up to that one, Dr. Farrow, what is the URL?
Oh, it's www.dermgpt.com.
Awesome, thank you. And we have another question from the room. What is the learning curve for using this product?
Well, I mean, for me, I've kind of created it, so I think it's really fast, but I would love to actually get feedback on that. To me, it's very intuitive, but it's also, I've kind of put my brain in it. So of course that would, I'm well, this is easy and this is quick. But I think, when I had my medical assistants in clinic kind of bring this on, they all immediately used it but they're also a very smart bunch of a really good group, but they adopted it very easily and started using it quite a bit. So hopefully it's not that difficult to use. I think it's pretty easy.
And perhaps maybe a survey soliciting the user's experience could also help improve the usability over time too.
And another one, and then we'll come into this room. How similar does it function to Chat GPT and other similar AI?
Yeah, so it's very different. It's the first generative AI platform with just dermatology information in it. It's also a very advanced version. So, and a lot of data that stopped maybe around like 2021 for Chat GPT. This is very updated. So it's updated and it's very specific and curated. So you might put something in Chat GPT and get a similar answer, but you may not, because it's looking at everything, and it has all the web and any article written by anything or any person or blog that it can pull from. This really just pulls from peer-reviewed information that a dermatologist can trust. So that would say, I think that's the main difference. It's constantly updated and it's just highly curated.
Awesome. And while we're waiting for more from the room, maybe.
Oh yeah, perfect. Okay, so we'll turn it to our live audience here. Any questions for our panelists?
So I do have a question for the panelists. Y'all have all talked about trends in medical education, and I was just wondering, what are some of the trends that you've observed for medical schools or medical students in terms of AI, maybe their utilization in research projects or even on rotations or your interactions with them?
Good question. Really good question for Dr. Armstrong.
Yeah, I think if they do use it, they are keeping it as a secret from us. I think, I actually encourage it as a kind of augmenting their learning as well as their communication. So if they're using it, I would say just make sure you proofread it to make sure it's accurate, because sometimes depends on how the information is fed to it or the specificity of the information. You will notice that it will come out sort of putting in sort of very nice prose of what you said, but it may not organize it the way one wants to. So I do think it's very helpful. I do think actually in terms of the evaluators and, if there needs to be evaluation, it could be very difficult, because we actually may not know if Chat GPT was used or not. So I wonder in the future if people need to certify that, AI was not used in writing this essay or writing this research paper. But I do have to say, I've had conversations with journal editors. They actually, they have now their guidelines of the use of Chat GPT for journal articles. And they said that you can use them for essentially for, improving grammar of the paper and the flow. So they actually accept that. So, and I think that's actually very helpful for many scientists who English may not be their native language, but they have a very, scientifically rigorous work that they want to present. And so that they're not hindered by English, for example, not being their primary language or whatever the primary language of the publication is. So I think it can be useful in that regard. But we do want to also understand what is original work coming from the authors versus really sort of majority of it being generated by AI.
Just to add on that, I'm pretty confident that all the manuscript I have received recently and in the past from medical student, from fellow, from others, were not by AI. And the reason I know that is because there are plenty of grammatical errors.
There you go. That's fascinating. Any other questions from our audience? One from the chat?
Yes,
Okay.
we've got another from the chat. Will the program expand to other specialties, say spine GPT or neuro GPT?
That's a great question.
Sure, on my spare time, I could find out. Well, with this, I think what's special about this to me is because dermatology is what I know, and I really I think that's the difference between physicians leading maybe markets and non-physicians, because the obvious thing to the business would be, yes, of course, it would expand. But I think these things, it's so important that they be done by the specialty, they be done by somebody in that specialty, or if, let's say this expands, that you have a team of orthopedic surgeons or neurosurgeons working on it. Because if the data is just something they think is going to be good enough, it probably won't be good enough. Just like a lot of the technology we have now. It's like they're, our EHRs and things like that. They're there, they do the job, but they weren't really created with us in mind.
Right.
So
I think all of us being involved with the production of new technology just benefits us all and benefits our field.
But if there's any neurosurgeons or you watching who want to do that project,
Collaborations,
just email me.
collaborations. Oh, that's great. Any other questions?
No more in the room, and we have about 4 minutes left.
Okay, we do have one in the audience.
I have one more. So I appreciate the clarification on how Derm GPT compares and differs from Chat GPT. When you were creating Derm GPT, was that with the odd targeted audience of being dermatologists, or do you feel like this could apply to a broader audience of other specialty like myself, or other ancillary staff like medical assistant nurses, and PPAs?
That's a really good point, actually. I think with us, we was just saying board certified dermatologists, and that's our world. But really, I have a lot of my friends who are pediatricians or internal medicine doctors will commonly, and this happens with all of us, send you a photo, ask you a question, like how do you prescribe this, or how do these questions that really AI could actually answer pretty easy. Well, maybe not the photo part, but if they're asking how do you prescribe this medicine, how do you get it covered, or the first line medicine wasn't covered, what would be second line? These kind of common questions. I think we share a lot of patients among specialties. It's not just dermatology, and skin conditions are everybody sees skin conditions, I think. So it could expand. Right. I think for our major workflow, I think of the dermatologist seeing 30 patients, 35 patients a day potentially, and needing to kind of use all of these tools. But really, if it's just looking up information and you're going to use Chat GPT or using Google and it's derm related, using Derm GPT will be more precise because it'll pull from the dermatology peer reviewed literature.
I think that's a great point. I mean, we do have platforms like Up to Date that a lot of physicians across all specialties use, primary care doctors, pediatricians, and some of the information that I see on there, it can be, it is specific to derm, but it's very broad, maybe not as specific to what I need. I just need a quick yes or no question. So maybe having something that is just derm specific, but can still answer questions that some of these specialists have. For example, what's the first line treatment for acne? A lot of primary care doctors and pediatricians treat acne. And so having that information at the tip of their fingers, I think would be a good thing for both our field and all the other specialties that merge with dermatology as well, specifically for the patients. Okay. I think that is our time. Any others?
No more in the Zoom room.
Well, wonderful. And any from the audience? Well, wonderful. Thank you so much to our panel of experts. And thank you for our viewers, both in person and online. This has been a wonderful and really informative session. I particularly am excited about the future of dermatology with respect to AI. I feel that it could only bring great things to better improve our livelihoods, improve our workflows, efficiency, and also benefit the patient. So thank you all.
Thank you.
And thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Carlson.
Of course.